Jam den den jam be yong la sha za lo kang ge lo de dem nye den de nye da nam da rab sa ra ve chi nye dun gun chi jin zi ni je tu gra le won ze kong ba si be chun ra ma re nun tam dung nge chi ze ve ro zo kon la pu che ta yin la tu ju yong den song zhuo de lai che nye mo nye long le ge zhao zhuan zhuan zai jin ma re nu si re dung ran yu gu chi nye jen zai ra je nam den da ji sa ju da zhen yan den lu zuo jia zi tu yu gu 就在就断就年间的大人们是将被用来的，在这年节节前热不是这大人的么们把绕死了呢，高当定居雄路都把也路着不便弄完走路。 nam da zu dem ser je sa je den zen ba mer ling ke ben ze sharab nye de nong we chö kun sal tum jon ro we la ma sha ge ro xie xie ka la chen ro bi chen gu ro je ze be we dong du je len la po yer we den ba kun ne san ze be ga yu ren bo che la cha je wo Rengam Sava Mendro Dambe Sue Remi Lamje Lobro Trema Jong Deshin Kuijin Trev Terzepe Yongze Lama Jubra Je La Du Sarab Kundu Sije Tanye Le Tamke Samme Shagi Yong Zongshin Shanchub Nimbe Lamke Karma Ba Mishe De Jivu Zuge Du Lasso tene samba shongchip chodo tukje barambashi sal tamne katsang tune mutu desen ronang.
So please listen to the continuation of yesterday's teachings. But to begin with, as usual, generate the precious body-mind.
Taipei Tandama Shuye de Sholoka Trupa, Lalin Sodong Trupa Insare.
So today we'll start with the explanations of the 6th of the 37 practices of a bodhisattva.
Te Karendo Sana, Geve Shini, Tensute, Resha.
And it's about how a practitioner relates to the spiritual friend.
Tate Sholokate Kanshi Tenna Nyepa Senjurshin Yenden Yangu Datar Penjurwe Shini Tambarang Luwe Tang Jebranzam Bajasela Yin Sonet.
And here the author Thomas Sangpo says the following: those you depend on, who put an end to vices, who make good qualities increase like the waxing moon, holding these spiritual friends even more dear than your own body, this is the practice of a bodhisattva.
Tande sung yonde perna tsik tamate ke karasung dosena je baranzam bajase lalins perna ngaranso ge Lune de la Chete Casse Chegido Songate. Lune de la Chete Shibu Chichegiare, Tilayang Passage, Lama Gavishini Tela, Kupatang, Tenets, Ta, Karashe, Kupatang, Chateau Duye, Tenet, Tapache, Tenzo Gore, Songi.
So here, at the end of this verse, Thomas Sangpo says that a practicing bodhisattva should value the spiritual friend or friends more than his own body. So here one needs to look at oneself in order to evaluate just how much one takes care of the physical body. And one will find that one does so to a great extent. And Tome Sampo points out that one should, in terms of respecting, serving, trusting in and the like, in terms of one's relationship with the spiritual friend, go further than that in one's efforts to serve, trust in, respect, and so on. So that's much more important, or rather, the spiritual friend is much more important than the status or health or whatever aspect otherwise of one's physical body.
Thì 인제 다 텐제게 신 단데레도 알아 치 나네 간시 땐나 예빠세 열신 연땡 연에 양녀 다터 펜줄베 신인 담바 승겐데게 게베 신인게 신이 간데 엠바테 세보 땡용거도 와.
So at the beginning of the verse, Tome Sampo lists some of the good qualities a true spiritual friend has. He says the true spiritual friend is a person who assists the practitioner so that the practitioner becomes able to put an end to vices and instead develop good qualities. And if there previously are good qualities, the spiritual friend will aid the practitioner so that these qualities increase, like the waxing moon. So here, Tome Sampo gives some of the characteristics of a true spiritual friend. So here one can see that a true spiritual friend is the opposite of what we talked about yesterday, bad friends, those who have a negative impact on people, who make their faults increase and so on by way of impacting the mental poisons, meaning making the mental poisons increase rather than good qualities.
But this on the door, true numbers in Kente, seeing to the young youngers, Zaro to the young younger, song door.
Shadow, the Driyusa.
Yeah, Zato said the Chambo, Gabo, Tropochene, youngers. Seeing to the younger said the Rang Lamanda with Surdane. Then it should send your Lord Derne, then that's a younger charity. Did Dokshon in the hair on the door.
You see, in terms of bad friends, of course, that applies to all such people in general. However, in the context of a practitioner of a Buddhist path, it in particular is a reference to individuals with respect to whom one takes the view that they are spiritual friends. That's one's judgment in terms of those people. That's the judgment one has made, and therefore one follows them. there are also people one is close with who appear to be nice people. This is one's personal judgment with respect to the people one socializes with, in particular those whom one see as very close to one. But it happens, and quite frequently perhaps, that the judgment made is mistaken. And so it's very important to make the extra effort in order to be able to make a proper judgment, so that mistakes like seeing someone as a true spiritual friend who isn't, and therefore follow that someone's advice, instructions, and the like, and that person may give one advice and instructions that contradict Buddhism and its principles, its teachings. However, since I made the right judgment, perhaps I didn't think enough, perhaps I accepted this person too fast without giving myself time to really find out what sort of person this is or isn't. Whatever the reason, this type of spiritual friend, who in fact isn't a spiritual friend, it's only me who, because of my wrong judgment, sees him as such. I will then follow his instructions that contradict the Buddha's teaching. And so I'll end up in a situation where I follow someone who is making me go astray from the Buddhist path. However, again, it's because of my personal decision. So it's also a matter of the mistaken practitioner taking his own responsibility for his own mistakes and not blaming others for mistakes that have happened.
Nyepa sen joshi chebari nyepa de karesena jamde de nyam lamji nyamne samatsu dona sapa sumji nangdun dogiyote te inte sapa sudimji labe menton shode dashagi rikt zore te ma se dogres tene lapa tingenzi labe menton shode zo shedong de sem number 2 de batere Teseje Juchagres. Tene Lapating Sherapji Lape, Menton Shote, Tene Karshu, Timugre, Tenyepa Sandurjin, Satusam Nyepate, Remji Setumki.
So Thomas Sampo says, those you depend on who have the effect on you of you ending or doing away with vices. That person is a true spiritual friend. So again, in terms of one's relationship with a spiritual friend, one has to look at oneself to see what is the result of me relying upon this person. Now, in terms of putting an end to vices, that is about progressively putting an end to the three mental poisons, passion, aggression, and ignorance. Buddha Shakyamuni summed up Buddhist behavior in three categories. The three trainings of ethics, samadhi, and higher knowledge. By way of ethics, there are various codes of ethics in Buddhism, but by way of adopting one or many of them and live by them, one counteracts passion, attachment in all its shapes and forms. And by way of samadhi, stable meditation states, one counteracts aggression. An aggressive or angry mindset is a mindset that is greatly perturbed. And by way of a stable meditation state, that perturbation can be, one can, by way of it, put an end to the perturbation in question and therefore counteract aggression, anger, and the like. And then there is higher knowledge, by way of which ignorance is counteracted. So you receive instructions, advice from the spiritual friend. If the instructions you use have this impact on you, it means that the spiritual friend in question is a true spiritual friend, because by way of him instructing you, guiding you, you're able to gradually diminish the power of the three mental poisons.
Tene tagana shingi ta tendreke lapasum ji minthön shote mashuk chong songwa yina ten lapasum ji yön tente yarngö dawana yin pertugre songre.
And once there has been some progress made here in terms of the process of putting an end to, in a progressive manner, the mental poisons. Once that process has started, qualities can be developed, good qualities that contribute in terms of the practitioner making progress on the path to enlightenment. Good qualities increase like the waxing moon.
Tendreki she tunking gave shenyete shenye tambare songre.
A spiritual friend who has this effect on his students is a holy man, truly a sacred person.
Ta tendreki shenye tambe sinyi te doju namna mongo song yore te ta ngema bobo shu debi. Dan dorsu du shabayina shenye tam shenye sinkente rang la longdur gne 신주 말로 어떤 통kin 식당 되네 대딱 뺀나라면 개위신이 대양 즉 고랑 최당 정집선 쥐바동 텀바지 누구나 다 신이 담바래 대sam래 신이게 신이 착성하지 이메트인데 될라 잠케양 깔에 가버려라 가신 잠케 이제 예봉도 동나양 그러면 대통 투에라 깔에 가버려 거죠.
Kanreisana da chirta mirta mi drova mi jikten till att madje drotsare.
Baje shiran rosare. Pena tang nga tsepe shu de ko shege do wa. Sanje kan ma pan rawo chi li na yang yuen den je pong ko thong men do wa. Me mango chi ge yen de chön re men de chön re se de do wa.
Now, previously, during other courses, Khenpo Rinpoche has at length listed and explained about the characteristics of a true spiritual friend. So he will not during this course go into the details of that. However, in brief, a true spiritual friend is the spiritual friend who instructs disciples so that they acquire knowledge of what is to be done and what isn't to be done in terms of being able to make progress on the path to enlightenment. Now, if a spiritual friend has this impact on disciples, it means that he is a true spiritual friend, someone who himself abides by the principles of the Buddha's doctrine, and in the context of Mahayana Buddhism, someone who abides by the Bodhi mind, someone who himself has to a great extent developed the Bodhi mind. However, in this context, we also have to look at the state of affairs in the world we live in, the world system we live in, at this particular point in time. We live in a point of time referred to as a period of degeneration, where ethics and the like are deteriorating. The behavior of human beings in particular has deteriorated a great deal in comparison to, for example, the time of Buddha Shakyamuni on the Indian subcontinent. So not so long ago, if we think in terms of the perspective of humankind throughout the history of humankind. So not very long ago, the world was very different. Our world was very different in terms of ethics and the like compared to now. A great deal of degeneration has occurred. Therefore, today there are many who take an interest, or I should rather say, therefore today, in terms of those who take an interest in the Buddhist path, it's quite often the case that many of those individuals do not have the capacity to see the kind of good qualities a spiritual friend does have. It's beyond them to recognize the good in others, simply because the state of affairs of today in terms of things having degenerated. So people's mindsets today are obscured to quite some extent making it impossible for them to sometimes even notice the extraordinary qualities of a true spiritual friend. If we take the example of the present Karmapa, who is nothing but an individual who embodies but good qualities. There are many, many people in this world who do not even notice a good quality in this individual. There are many who speak of the faults they see in him rather. And that sort of mindset is very common in today's world. Therefore, it may be that individuals do encounter a true spiritual friend but fail to notice, as it were, and goes elsewhere to someone who isn't a true spiritual friend, because that's sort of the tendency in this time of degeneration. Not in all cases, of course, but that sort of thing happens. It's not necessarily the case that a person who embodies good qualities will be recognized for his good qualities anymore.
Tiindu perna shanchup sempe denne shinkin jikten kore shuyade lama gevshinit. Shanchup sempe denne chi mashena flomate shanchup sempe jepala tishig marwa.
Now,
lama kepaji gore said.
Yeah. A true spiritual friend, in terms of his qualities, one perspective is that of the spiritual friend's own education and knowledge in terms of the Buddha's doctrine. The Buddha's doctrine, which has three categories, referred to as the three baskets, that include a wide variety of topics. Now, the true spiritual friend is someone who should have knowledge of these three categories and their wide variety of topics. Because ask yourselves the question, is it possible for someone who doesn't have that knowledge to guide others on the path to enlightenment? The Buddha's doctrine sets forth the knowledge that's required in order to attain enlightenment. So a person who doesn't have knowledge of the Buddha's doctrine, could that person really guide others to enlightenment? Probably not. One would presume that this isn't possible. And in terms of Mahayana Buddhism, how can a spiritual friend who doesn't have a detailed knowledge of the path of a bodhisattva guide those who aspire to become practicing bodhisattvas? One has to ask oneself questions like that, because it's up to the person who takes an interest in the path also to shoulder his responsibility of making the right judgment.
Daganna shinge shinyi tambatela chudong tembeke lungai isam bi jepachi mena te jepa kanjong manjong jenggen yina yang tele tepa jetwe khakurba. And in terms of the spiritual friend's behavior as to words, thoughts, and deeds, body, speech, and mind, one also has to take a look at the person
to see if this person truly acts in accordance with the various codes of ethics that Buddha Shakyamuni taught. Or if it's a person who is sort of haywire and doesn't really conduct himself according to the instructions given by Buddha Shakyamuni or not. So the person interested in practicing the path must also make an effort in terms of taking the right decision before relying upon someone as a spiritual friend. And that's up to that person alone. That person cannot expect others to do that for him.
Oda lama tindeji ni sona ta lome khandes chen ting gorasana rang lule chang che pran zamba sange te ta lome tin chu ti she.
So the person interested in the Buddhist path, having gone through the period of investigating the person whom he thinks could be his spiritual guide, if he ends up with the conclusion that this person is a true spiritual guide, then he should rejoice in that fact and offer service, respect and the like to this spiritual friend to an extent that's much higher than the extent to which he cares about his own physical body, as was said earlier.
That he into penna that love getender sangi te penna lama tin chute dosho ngosho take pasum changman hiu ji song de. Now,
there is then the actual relationship between the spiritual friend and the disciple, and the nature of that relationship, the parameters of it, as it were. And this has been explained at length in the sutras, in the tantras, in the context of the three branches of Buddhism. In all of those categories of the Buddha's doctrine, that the appropriate nature of that relationship has been explained at length.
Tene perna ta tende giseni tambachi topne tangone thane rani la khande cha de person loma rani jingone samatana.
So Khenpo Rinpoche will now say a few things about the practitioner and how or what is required of the practitioner in terms of his relationship with a true spiritual friend for that relationship to work simply, so that progress is made on the path to enlightenment.
Perna tanda lalin sodem jeva tanda Professor Sembajik song doga dinal. Tende gishini top sona song. Te jalwa sedang chepe dangni tu churware song. Kan la sena
Kare jalwa sedang chepa.
Se ya. Jalwa sedang chepa la kar song ju yobati lam tengal tengkin ti chabrwa song.
So, Khenpo Rinpoche, in terms of explaining this text authored by Tome Sangpo, which tells us what a bodhisattva does, relies on a commentary to it authored by Professor Senpaji. And in that commentary, Professor Senpaji says the following. The true spiritual friend is someone who embodies the qualities and knowledge of the Buddhas of the 10 directions and their spiritual sons. The qualities of all those individuals. How come, one may think? Well, the answer is simply because the true spiritual friend has the capacity to properly instruct the practitioner according to the teachings of all those Buddhas and their spiritual friends. And in this way, he embodies their qualities.
단 학벌 도양 대과 침부 최 땡킹 개외 신이 될라 땡주 간대지 고담에 그때 배나 셰싱긴 돌라 인도기 난도 성집 선바 땅윤 남타라고지
Shanshub Senpasu?
땅
Taktungu?
야 땅동우인 남탄라고지 대간나 신게 벤신 나로 벤 남탄라고지 예전 밀라레 벤 남탄라고지는 미베다네 간저 랍고
Now, we're all practitioners of Mahayana Buddhism, presumably. So, in the context of Mahayana Buddhism, the relationship between guru and disciple, the guru being the true spiritual friend, what the nature of that relationship is to be, or should be, is explained at length in the Prajnaparamita scriptures. Now, examples of practitioners of old who have been able to uphold that kind of relationship with the spiritual friend are the well-known Bodhisattva Ever Weeping, the Indian Buddhist master of old Naropa, and the most well-known Tibetan Buddhist master, Milarepa. These three are examples of individuals who've kept their relationship with the Guru pure.
단 돌수 뒤네 슈샤비나 베르나 잠드데게 도데 동북교파 생게티 나온다 단단간조
Dadi Xingdong Mampuyo Sasomashi.
대송부갑라 되네 단도티 나라 파고 송부주비 만남 생겐데 요리 단단간조 종교 송대 디갑들라 산제기 상집선바 노르종게 남타르제 송남부제
Norsang.
노르상 디 남타르데 간데전 송요르스나
Ja.
상집선바 노르종게 토말 산제지 간노알 때네 상집선만 잠베 양도 군데는 송집도 셈지 디께반에 송데 상집 셈베게 람지냠네 저 라마 찌기찌르 롱때네 람갑중 아지 땡이요
Ngapchungashi.
납중 아지
Lungten Nangens.
롱 땡킹인 잠베 양 송네 자나 게비신인데 잘 죽스 대자네 야 상집 셈베 쩌람 걸 가나 간섬 쇼차데 양 게비신인데 잘 죽스는 롱데 망거든 대템베 나네 상집 셈바 연 노송라 Shangchu Sempa Panjong was a Kentege, Namtan Lama Tin Sute, Yongyo.
Chanchup Sampasu?
Paljin Jone.
Palgi Jone?
Ya, Kon Lama Chusum Badre.
Chusumpa?
Ya,
Ngapchunga Shiginala.
Nana. Tangbodin Yang
Minkar.
Paljin, Paljong Sung, the Paljin Jone.
Now, in terms of what the practitioner himself is expected to and required to do in terms of keeping his relationship with the spiritual friend pure, there are extensive explanations. Perhaps most of you have heard a lot about the qualities that are required in terms of the true spiritual friend, what qualities he should have. Perhaps there haven't been that many explanations in terms of the qualities of the practitioner, because it's not a one-way street, the path to enlightenment, where there is someone leading who is supposed to be good in all instances, and then the one who follows does both this and that's okay. It's not okay. And one needs to know how one, as a practitioner, should conduct oneself. And in brief, Khenpo Rinpoche explains, the Buddha, the Bhagavan, Buddha Shakyamuni himself, in one of his discourses, apparently given in a place where there were a grove of trees, or in a forest, a place with many trees. That's what the name indicates, the name of the sutra. Anyway, you're probably familiar with the path of aspirations of Kuntu Sangpo, all good actions, that bodhisattva. And that path of aspirations, or that aspiration prayer, as it's very often known as, is part of this sutra. And among other things, the Buddha, or in addition to that, the Buddha in this sutra talked about the practitioner's requirements, as it were, in terms of upholding a pure relationship with the spiritual guide. And he mentioned a bodhisattva of old by the name Good Prosperity. Now, he was a disciple of Buddha Shakyamuni, it appears, and Buddha Shakyamuni had advised him to go and see the bodhisattva Manjushri and to take the bodhisattva vows from him, commit to the path of a bodhisattva in the presence of Manjushri, which Good Prosperity did. He was also instructed to seek out other spiritual friends, other accomplished bodhisattvas. All in all, 54. So the practitioner, Good Prosperity, had that many spiritual friends and kept his relationship to all of them pure by way of adhering to the parameters applicable here, what is expected of a practitioner. The practitioner's response to the spiritual friend, as it were. Now, in this list of 54 spiritual friends, the Bodhisattva Manjushri is number 1, and then when we get to number 13, that was a Bodhisattva but known as Source of Extraordinary Good, whom the practicing Bodhisattva Good Prosperity was advised to see and to study and practice with. The advice was, of course, given by Buddha Shakyamuni himself.
Tati labjat karanang parasana, ta chorang gi la sangchup sembe kyo par lap tup dum tup singente lama tinchu la ra lebre songre.
Lab tup mi tup.
Sangchup sembe kyo par lap tup dum tup set.
Tene?
Lama tinchu la ra lebre. Lama tinchu de chujin de tena lap tup re song.
This spiritual friend, by the name Source of Extraordinary Good, said the following at the very outset to Good Fortune as he had sought his advice. Well, in terms of you being able to practice the path of a bodhisattva or not, it all hinges on the nature of your relationship with the spiritual friend. Whether you're able to keep that relationship pure or not. If so, you will be able to make progress on this path.
And
then Source of Extraordinary Good, the spiritual friend, went on to explain this in great detail. Now, Khenpo Rinpoche will give 8 points from that extensive explanation, 8 examples or 8 points. Now, Source of Extraordinary Good himself, the spiritual friend, set forth these 8 examples in an attempt to sum up the more extensive explanation he had given. The first example was that of the ground, the earth itself, which all of us walk upon. It's seen as something very stable. That's always there for us to use. All of us who inhabit this world system. So it's an example of stability. And the spiritual friend here advised the practitioner good fortune as follows. He said, whatever the instructions you're given, you should never waver. There should never be a sense of doubt or regret or a sense of becoming depressed, thinking, oh, I can't do this. You should always, no matter what the instructions are, receive those with joy and the intention to simply execute the instructions.
Dene tapen kamre lama singide kayam sin namgre nge pechuga
Lasso?
Kamaram tel yedu tourism thinking jagar jawuchiyo jagar jawuchiyo te
Jagar Rashitos.
jagar
An Indian with a beard.
beer che chik enemy mustache che metropochiyo Then you song Agama Memin and Rantinger Dogshow song.
Campola Kanang Ere.
Then Ganso tell Cashe, Chitama songs, Agama Mending Trampegam and Shik Dogshow songs. The Ganso can get candy start the Hesher. So even a 1,000 Rantinger Shabata Tabiar was that Tessam never. Lamekanana, Tessam never go beyond.
Now, the main point here, apparently, is that of not entertaining doubts in any situation to any extent at all, but having an unconditional trust in the instruction given, even though it may at times to a regular person seem very weird, as in the following example, which is from the time of Khenpo Rinpoche's youth, when his older brother, both of them lived in Rumtek Monastery, and his older brother was the personal attendant to the late Karmapa, the 16th Karmapa. Now, on one occasion, a group of them were in the two brothers and a few other people were in the room with His Holiness. And there was an Indian tourist guide who frequently came to Rumtek Monastery with tourists. A man who was a bit full of himself, and he was a tall Indian man with an Indian mustache. I don't know if you've been to India. In terms of previous times, the youth no longer in India seem interested in this, but not very long ago it was very fashionable to have grown long mustaches, and great care was taken and great status attached to having this in terms of men preoccupied with their appearances. Now, this man arrived, and His Holiness had just said, while this group of people, Khenpo Rinpoche's brother and some others, were in the room of His Holiness, seated there with him, he just said, oh, that man who is so full of himself, he's here again. Someone needs to slap him in the face so he realizes he's not as extraordinary as he believes. Now, all of them sat there thinking, oh, but of course, no one except Khenpo's older brother, Supenla, reacted. He got up, went up to the man, and slapped him quite hard. in his face, because he is the sort of person in whose mind not even the shadow of a doubt ever arises in terms of what the person he relies upon as a true spiritual friend says. He simply got up and slapped the man in his face. End of story. All the rest, Khenpo himself and the others, failed.
Tene sambat number takwa dorje tabi semchi gore sir.
Sem number.
Sem number takwa jigla ta tepe njurwa tsan mebish.
The next, in terms of the 8 examples, is that of a Vajra. It's about a ritual object. We know it as such, but its origin in Indian mythology is that of it being an indestructible weapon of divine individuals living in the so-called God realm. It's a symbol of changelessness. Now, here the spiritual friend, source of extraordinary good, instructed his disciple, good prosperity, as follows. He said, your mindset should be pure. And its purity should embody changelessness, like a Vajra. So the pure mindset of the practitioner, again, in terms of purity, should never waver. There shouldn't be any changes, as it were, in terms of the purity of the mindset of the practitioner. So this is an example of the importance in terms of the practitioner's behavior, the importance of not letting oneself be influenced by others. This is very common, particularly in today's world, that people let themselves be influenced. If you've decided you found the proper thing, stick to it. The third example is that of an immovable mountain. Well, all mountains are, as it were, immovable, unless there is an earthquake, but yeah. The idea of a mountain is that it's something that's immovable. And the spiritual friend here, source of extraordinary good, explained to good fortune that no matter what your circumstances, no matter how difficult they may be, no matter how much you may suffer, your trust and confidence in the 3 jewels is not to waver. Supplicate the 3 jewels in terms of overcoming your difficulties, your suffering, and so forth, like an immovable mountain.
Tene le thamche dupala yok zongbota bi semti gore chet.
La
Lamme shawach tenzo dubiye la yok posongbo ji nan de le se order tangong marwa.
Da de perna drichem puchiki yena tene lama di karigoge me shegira. di certa mirtangi dicem making gi shegi marwa kanle chi kogor bo
tat rejil kogiyorwa
dicem boyken
ya
tene lama de kare gogi me so gi semla sha tene de che lama de takparation de che de machi summa go chene sungyorwa
ya
lasa
ti song yisare na
tene pe karere ina
pe ten song bo ta song de yok bo song bo nang shi nang le yok ya ko ji an ko kan ga le ro ro dan te ngame pe ro
the fourth example is that of someone employed in the household. Now, you have to put this in the context of society at the time of Buddha Shakyamuni, because this occurred during his lifetime. The spiritual friend at hand and his disciple were both living at that time. And in those days, families of some standing and of some wealth would have a number of people employed in the household. And employees in the household, well, some of them would develop very good and become very good at what they were supposed to do, and others not. Here the example is that of such an employee who is attentive to the needs of the members of the household he works for, to the extent where the person in charge of the household doesn't need to tell him all the time, today you do 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth. This employee is someone who is attentive, someone who wants to do a good job, and who therefore has memorized what needs to be done, to the extent that no one needs to tell him, he just does it. So the best kind of household employee, as it were. Of course, that would apply in today's world to any employee in any other circumstances, not just households. But at the time, this was the most common thing, and hence the example. And the context here is that of a disciple of a spiritual friend, a disciple, one would say, who knows the spiritual friend well, meaning someone who's been around for quite some time, and who is the type of person who has taken note of what the spiritual friend needs to be done for him, to the extent where the spiritual friend doesn't have to ask this person all the time, could you please do this, or could you please organize that? The disciple knows what is to be done and is ready to do it, and does so joyfully, thus making life very easy for the spiritual friend, rendering him the services that are needed.
대간나 신기 ngajal pung besem shagdar tabuj gore songre.
Then we've come to the fifth example.
ngajal pung besem
Yes.
shagdar tabuj geshabe brondobj.
The next example is that of a broom. A broom sweeps away dust, it cleans up the area, or with it one can clean up an area. And the broom is an example of the way one can clean with a broom is an example of how one is to sweep one's mindset free of pride.
Tegan na shinge ta lame ka na la lar mitrowa chi zangbo ta bi semji ko re chebre.
Lar mitrowa
Lame chik na na atse tende jasin bo zan
lar
sam
sena yanker se
yang cher
gör.
troa mi je wa
Det där låma dig trova yang ne yang tjijusar.
je ka ji chi go sarwa
Alltså lar mitrova
lar mitrowa chi zangbo ta bi sem song re.
kisa på.
Go chi ya ko ten zo jindal zan jindal dona ko tro long ma de chebre.
The next example is that of a nice dog who is always devoted to his owner, even if the owner may mistreat him on and off. And here that is to be translated to the practitioner's relationship with the spiritual friend. In the following context, that of the spiritual friend instructing the disciple to do this or that. The disciple, there is not even a shadow of irritation in his mind because he's been asked to do something, for example. The disciple doesn't become annoyed thinking, for example, oh no, why do I have to do this now again? Couldn't he have asked something else? Somebody else, sorry. Thoughts of that kind, or irritation and annoyance accompanied with thoughts of that kind, simply do not happen in the mind of the disciple. Just as a dog devoted to his owner never feels any annoyance or irritation with the owner, even though the owner may be a demanding person, for example.
Chi zangbo singe jel takje na na chi zangbo de jinda da than ne lo gu chu song de na jinda de rigwa ta nam sang ke je ju ngu do.
A devoted dog who, for example, goes missing and who's found perhaps 9 years later still remembers the owner when they are reunited and is overjoyed because of being reunited with his owner. That's the extent of the devotion the dog has for his owner. It's not always that humans are that devoted. Particularly in today's world. Drova tang.
La magica non son senandro, chose na te chede.
Chipada på marve.
To the cagarendo, truth of sempi god is on it.
Rein drawing de la care kogogen.
Tante so la mecana carri in a young. That in the just in Busan, Mason, Nam
Larmi trova de marve.
That day, Nam Yinsin Candegil Ganachuna got a druba.
Then there is point number 7 here, which is similar to the previous, number 6, though there is a situation perhaps of a higher level of demand, as it were, in terms of getting things done for the spiritual friend. And here one would think perhaps of the context as a 24/7 context, where things have to be done at all hours, as it were, for the spiritual friend, or friends, perhaps, for whatever reason. I mean, there may be penna give shinyin to at sen layang kab you can perhaps think of it in the context of a spiritual friend who has a disease which requires him having, for example, 1 or 2 insulin injections to be administered during the night. So the disciple, who in his unwaveringness, as it were, as to him holding his relationship with the spiritual friend pure, is the kind of person who simply gets up and gets it done without any irritation or a sense of being annoyed and the like. And here the example is that of a ship. A ship comes and goes constantly. It crosses one ocean after the other without ever feeling tired or annoyed or irritated or angry over the fact of having to come and go, move about all the time. As in the example, that will translate to attending to the kind of needs as well as other needs of the spiritual friend 24/7. Just like the sheep, without there ever being irritation or anger involved.
Tene nor suduna
Bus dympa
dum tanda dum ta jepan. Pen dorna Puzung Pamala Tawa Jishini Tambatel Gore Sever.
Pusang po Pamala.
Tawan machine. Tapugusambu Giana Puinanda, Pomoinanda, Pamala Tato Chegroa.
The 8th example is that of a devoted child in terms of his parents. A devoted child, or a child devoted to the needs of his parents later on in life as an adult, is prepared to be available for the parents, again 24/7. So that's again an example, number 8 in this list of 8 examples, given in order to describe how a practitioner keeps his relationship with the true spiritual friend pure.
Yang Chu Shuvikabla Samna Tantan the Dutch go to Somate. Ndo Tagaran.
Or
Rich Poos, Rich Pomos, Po Pomosu Inaendas, Danilan Neven Dushi Jebr Shaws.
In the same sutra, the Buddha says the following in the context of the mindset of a disciple when receiving instructions, when receiving or listening to teachings. Sarma song. Där rigger pudan på mukande och nepagidushe. The Buddha said, good men and women, when receiving instructions, think of yourselves as ill individuals, as sick people. That's how you are to view yourself. And think of the spiritual friend, see the spiritual friend as a physician.
Tene chö tembalane mingendo she sho.
And view the instructions of the Buddha Dharma given as medication.
Tene chö drupitsena ne nyeor tsowata min sawana shingendo she yaguris neya.
And view your practice of these instructions the way you see taking medication, or the way you view taking a medication.
That's all. That then door do and there is some other matter. Sending thing to there.
So the explanations given here today in the context of keeping a pure relationship with a spiritual friend, the explanations given here today are very brief. There are very extensive explanations in both the sutras and the tantras as to further perspectives and details.
Dongma lam khare nyamsoni nangi na shenyin tenchu de yaboch machung na lam te tharsin de kala khabshira.
Now, whether one practices the sutras or the tantras or both, this type of pure relationship is very important because in the absence of it, it would be very difficult, if not impossible, to make progress.
Lakpar tuyam dorje thek per lam binyamni chinnan ta lama te sanje sta gobi yara mato tene lam gindevo tharsin tbiya te khapur yungmare.
In particular, regarding the Vajrayana, the Buddhist tantras, where the requirement is an ability to see the Guru as a Buddha. In the Vajrayana, it's not possible at all to attain the goal of this Buddhist branch without that view.
Pena karishu desungdwa lama sangye lama chö tejen lama gendon te sungdwa.
In the Buddhist tantras, there is the frequent mention of that the Guru embodies the three jewels. The Buddha, the Buddha Dharma, and the Sangha.
Tene ti yingwe junsen karalesna kunji shepol lamate chevare pen sanje rang ngo she chö ngo she
De kungi chepo.
lamate laman namla sha jiwo sende judi chigwa
Kungi chepo tene.
lamate
Kungi chepo de tsik de kan ji.
kunji sheposna nge sanje ngo she chö ngo she gendo ngo she ke zawate lamal thu de barwas.
Simply because without the Lama, it's not possible for a practitioner to even come in contact with the Buddha Dharma, and the Sangha. So the Lama is seen as the source of the practitioner having the possibility to come in contact at all with the three jewels.
Lasso, that rinde jagi, che number sangma, tenebede, karsa, Yishu ge chongkar tu chen tang, ten losa, sangma le yaku yung monam jagi, ten kais na losarbe nang la nge jamro ne ngo tsudu ma shugi.
So we'll end here today. Khenpo Rinpoche wishes a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to everyone. And in the next verse, which will be the first teaching session of the next year, the details of the practice of taking refuge in the three jewels will be explained.
Te tender madigala, tender dik dendu pe yabuchu.
And the fact that we got to this point today, at the very end of this year, is a so-called auspicious coincidence. It's very auspicious to be able to start the new year with those explanations on the practice of taking refuge in the three jewels.
Talo jemat ne te tanda lo burgi jengen de zokanga shi nga zokanga lo chusun ro ne kuncho sum bi jawo de tsube lemmonam yegins.
And Khenpo Rinpoche will make prayers towards the effect that all of us and all others will come under the protection of the three jewels, the present and that the present pandemic will in the new year come to an end.
Sunam de tamje zegbani tomna ye be danam pamje jegana che balap truwa ye sigbe cholen rowa drolwa so jesi namkara ne jurpa desig ro de ne jur desi tone dane de ro pende drupra so